The ground where my childhood home once stood was now nothing but a pit of dust and broken bricks. And there, right at the edge of the debris, stood my husband, Greg Talbot, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. He was on the phone with me. "I demolished your house," he said. "You're welcome." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I laughed. A hollow, almost eerie sound that came from somewhere deep inside me. Because that house wasn't what he thought it was. Let me take you back. My name is Monica Talbot. I'm 52 years old, a retired schoolteacher, a mother of 2 grown children, and, until recently, the wife of a man I no longer recognized. I used to live a life of routines and modest joys in Lexington, Kentucky. I thought I knew what my future looked like. Peaceful days with my husband, weekends with my children, and maybe a trip or 2 to the mountains. But as life so often does, it didn't just change. It shattered. It started with the accident. One rainy December morning, my father was driving back from the farmer's market when a speeding truck ran a red light. The impact killed him instantly. He was 68, still full of plans and healthy as a horse. My mother collapsed when the officer came to tell her the news. From that moment on, she stopped eating. I tried everything. I brought her soup, her favorite ginger tea, even the chocolate cake she used to sneak slices of after dinner when she thought no one was watching. "Mom," I'd plead sitting by her bedside, "you have to eat? Just a little. Please." She would only shake her head and whisper, "It feels like something's stuck in my chest, Monica. Like there's no room left for food, just pain." At first, I thought it was just grief, but she kept losing weight, fast. Within 3 weeks, her cheekbones were sharp and her clothes hung off her like paper bags. I took her to the hospital, and what I heard next knocked the breath out of me. Stage 4 cancer, inoperable, terminal, 1 year. That's all we had left. I stared at the doctor, willing him to say he made a mistake, but he didn't flinch. My mother sat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, like she was afraid they might betray the terror she was trying to hide. I went home that night, opened the door to our shared townhouse, and stood in the kitchen for 5 full minutes before saying a word to Greg. He was at the dining table, working on something for his company's marketing presentation. When I told him I wanted to move in with my mother to care for her, his pen stopped mid-stroke. "Again with your family," he said flatly. "We just buried your dad. Now I have to be dragged into more of this." I blinked at him. "She's dying, Greg." He sighed loudly, like I'd just asked him to donate a kidney. "Can't you just drive her to the hospital and back? Why do you have to live there?" "Because she'll be alone. Because she can't even get out of bed without help. Because she's my mother." He stood up, scoffing. "And who's going to take care of me while you're playing Florence Nightingale over there? Huh? Who's cooking, cleaning, doing laundry?" I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. I was grieving, terrified, and all he saw was how it might inconvenience him. Finally, he said, "Fine, but don't expect me to lift a finger." And he meant it. We moved back into my childhood home, the one my father had built with his bare hands. It was a little creaky in places, but solid, familiar, safe. And even though Greg sulked like a child forced into timeout, I thought maybe this will be okay. It wasn't. He refused to help with meals, ignored my mother entirely, and complained that the TV was too loud or the house smelled like old people. I bit my tongue every time. I cleaned, cooked, ran errands, drove my mother to appointments, and still came home to his sulking presence like it was another weight on my back. "You don't even look at me anymore," I said one night. "I didn't marry your mom," he shot back, not even glancing up from his phone. Still, I stayed, because I didn't know how to abandon someone I loved. Not like that. Eventually, my mother grew weaker. She couldn't sit upright without assistance. She began to sleep almost all day. She'd squeeze my hand sometimes, smile faintly, and whisper, "Thank you for bringing me home." Those moments were everything. When she passed away, it was gentle. Just a long exhale, her hands in mine, her eyes already closed. I didn't cry right away. I felt emptied. The funeral was quiet, respectful. My children flew in. My brother Daniel brought his family. Everyone helped, except Greg. He sat at the very back, refusing to join the family row. When I asked him to move up, he said, "I'm not blood. I'll sit here." And then his mother leaned over and said, loud enough for others to hear, "He's your husband, not your mother's son. He doesn't belong in the family section." I felt something inside me splinter. That was the moment I knew I was alone. After the funeral, everyone gathered at the house. I brewed coffee, served lemon cake, my mother's recipe, and tried to hold it together. Greg's parents came too, uninvited but expectant, like they were entitled to be there now that my parents were gone. They sat on the living room couch like royalty, arms folded, glancing around at the furniture and framed memories like vultures at a carcass. I handed Greg's mother a cup of coffee. She sipped it, wrinkled her nose, and said, "Well, it's something. First your dad, now your mom. What a year for you." I stood there, still in my black dress, the hem wrinkled from kneeling at the cemetery, and I smiled. A practice smile, the kind you wear when screaming would be pointless. That night, I overheard Greg in the guest bedroom, talking on the phone with his father. "Must have been hell living in that place," his father said, laughing. "You're telling me," Greg replied. "Amy, Monica, she just gets so obsessed with her family. I swear, it's like I married her parents, not her." "You shouldn't have to deal with all that. Stand your ground." I stood in the hallway, fists clenched, staring at the peeling wallpaper my father never got around to fixing. I thought about all the meals I'd cooked, the nights I held my mother's hand through pain, and how Greg had done nothing. I should have confronted him then, but I didn't, because somewhere inside me was still that girl who believed marriage meant loyalty, even when it hurt. The next morning, as I was clearing out my mother's closet, Greg's mother entered the room without knocking. "Oh," she said, reaching toward the top shelf. "Can I have this?" She was holding my mother's old handbag, soft brown leather, slightly cracked at the edges. It still smelled like lavender and cinnamon like my mother. I blinked. "What?" "This bag," she repeated. "She won't be needing it, will she?" Greg said I could take it. I stepped forward, gently but firmly taking it from her hands. "No, you can't." Her smile faltered. "What do you mean? We're family. You said yesterday that Greg wasn't family at the funeral, that he was an outsider." She turned red, not from shame, but from challenge. "How dare you?" Greg and his father appeared at the doorway. I could see it in their faces. They expected me to give in, to apologize, to be small, but I didn't. "I'm not ready to go through my mother's things," I said, holding the bag close. "And when I do, I'll decide what happens to them, not you." Greg's father rolled his eyes. "This is what we get for showing up, huh?" Greg stayed silent. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight. His mother stormed out. "Let's go home, Harold." Greg followed them out the door without a word. No goodbye, no apology, just the sound of car doors slamming and tires crunching down the driveway. I stood in the doorway for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in around me like a bruise. My brother Daniel came by later that afternoon to check on me. He didn't ask questions. He just helped me bag the flowers from the service and stacked leftover food into containers for the fridge. "Monica," he said softly as he wiped his hands on a dish towel, "you don't have to stay here alone." But I shook my head. "This is home. I can't leave, not yet." I thought the worst had passed, that with my mother gone, the grief would slowly soften, that I'd find peace in routine again. I was wrong. Greg didn't come home for days. Then one night, I heard his car in the driveway. I opened the front door to see him standing there with an envelope in his hand. "Here," he said, handing it to me. "Travel vouchers. Take the kids. Go visit them. Spa weekend or something." I stared at him. Why? He shrugged. You need it. Change of scenery. I wanted to throw the envelope in his face, but then I thought about Logan and Sophie. I hadn't seen them properly in months. Maybe Greg was trying. Maybe he felt guilty. So I went. I spent the first 2 days at Sophie's condo in Louisville. We cooked together, watched old movies, and stayed up too late talking about nothing and everything. Then I drove to Logan's place in Cincinnati, where he grilled steaks on the patio and let me fuss over his laundry like he was still 17. It felt healing. At the end of the week, we drove together to a nearby hot springs resort. Nothing fancy, just warm water, steam, and quiet. I needed this, I told them, more than I realized. You should thank Dad, Sophie said, half smiling. It was his idea, right? I nodded slowly. Yeah, it was. But even as I smiled back, something in my gut twisted. Because Greg didn't do kindness. Not without reason. When I finally returned home, suitcase in hand, I didn't walk into peace. I walked into a war zone. Where my childhood home had stood was now a smoothed-out plot of dirt. Gone. And standing there, on the land where my parents once danced barefoot on summer nights, was Greg. He was smiling. I did it, he said, finally rid of that burden. Behind him, a moving truck pulled up. His parents got out. They were carrying suitcases. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My mouth was open, but no sound came out. I stared at the dirt, at the moving truck, at the 2 folding lawn chairs Greg's parents were now casually setting up like they were preparing for a barbecue, not moving into a crime scene. Greg, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. What did you do? He stepped forward with the same smug smile he wore when he scored a minor promotion at work. We cleared it. The house was old, falling apart, no one was using it. Figured now was a good time to start fresh. Start fresh? I echoed. You demolished my parents' house. It was ours now, he said with a shrug. Well, yours, but we're married, so what's the difference? I laughed. Not a normal laugh. It came out like air leaking from a tire. Sharp, painful, out of control. Greg's parents froze mid-step. His mother's mouth twisted. She's lost it, she muttered. All that grief must have cracked something in her brain. I kept laughing, holding my stomach like it hurt, and it did. But not from humor. Greg's face stiffened. Why are you laughing? I wiped a tear from my cheek. The smile still curled on my lips. You really don't get it, do you? Get what? There is no inheritance. Silence. Thick, hanging, suffocating silence. Greg blinked. His mother cocked her head. What do you mean? I crossed my arms. I gave all the liquid assets, cash, stocks, bonds, to my brother Daniel. We talked about it before Mom passed. I told him to keep everything. Why the hell would you do that? Greg snapped. Because I didn't want anything but the house, I said evenly. It was the only thing that mattered to me. It was home. His father stepped forward, his voice rising. You're lying. That house was worth something. That's why Greg, wanted to bulldoze it into dust. Greg was pacing now, the muscles in his jaw twitching. So, what? You're saying I did all this for nothing? You tell me, I replied. His mother threw up her arms. She's bluffing. Monica always plays these mind games. There must be something left. I tilted my head. You think I'd lie about giving up my own inheritance just to prove a point? Believe what you want. But the house? That's all there was. And now it's gone. Greg's face turned red. You can't just... I'm done, I interrupted, walking past him toward my car. He grabbed my arm. Where are you going? I looked at his hand, then at his eyes. Away. Far enough that I don't have to see the people who tore down my life brick by brick. He let go. I didn't look back. I drove straight to my attorney's office. It turns out demolishing a house that wasn't legally yours, even as a spouse, wasn't just morally bankrupt. It was also highly illegal. The deed was still in my mother's name, and while the inheritance was being settled, no one had the right to touch it, not without signed approval, not without paperwork, not without a soul. Greg and his father had bypassed all that. His father, conveniently in the demolition business, had rounded up a few guys and some rental equipment to clear the place while I was off soaking in mineral springs and massaging grief out of my bones. I sat in that leather chair across from my lawyer, hand shaking, heart hollowed out. "Is there anything I can do?" I asked. He smiled, the kind of smile that lawyers reserve for situations so clear-cut they practically write themselves. "Oh, Monica," he said, "we're not just going after them. We're going to bury them." That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling in my daughter's guest room, the legal documents resting on the nightstand like loaded weapons. I wasn't sure if I was angry or just numb, until the next morning, when I saw something that reignited every bit of rage I thought I had already burned through. Sophie, who had just returned from class, walked in with her phone held out. "Mom, is this?" On the screen was a listing on a second-hand selling app, a familiar apron, faded green with small hand-stitched daisies. I'd made it for my mother when I was in college. What? Sophie swiped down. 48 more listings. My mother's scarves, her antique jewelry box, even the teacup set she used only on Sundays, all being sold online. My hands trembled as I took the phone. This is her stuff. This is our stuff. "There's no reviews. The account's new," Sophie said, "but the shipping address. I ran it through a reverse search. It's Greg's parents' house." My vision tunneled. My throat dried. Of course. They hadn't just taken my house. They were now selling my mother's memories to strangers for $20 apiece. I dialed Greg immediately. He answered on the second ring. "What? You selling my mother's things online?" Silence. Then, "I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm coming to the house. Right now." "Monica," I hung up. I was already halfway out the door. Sophie insisted on coming with me. "You shouldn't go alone," she said, grabbing her keys. "You don't know what they'll say this time." I didn't argue. We pulled up to Greg's parents' house, just as the sun was sinking low, casting long, sharp shadows across the driveway. The same driveway where I used to help carry potluck dishes at family gatherings. The same porch where I once stood with flowers, hoping to impress a mother-in-law who never truly saw me. Greg opened the door before we even knocked. He looked startled. "Where are Mom's things?" I asked. No pleasantries. No smile. "I told you I don't. Tell the truth, Dad," Sophie cut in, stepping beside me. "You know what's happening." His mouth opened and closed. Behind him, his parents appeared, his mother still wearing one of my mom's cardigans like it belonged to her. "Oh, Sophie," she chirped. "So nice to see you, sweetheart." Sophie didn't respond. "Grandma," she said, her voice trembling with rage, "are you the one selling my grandmother's belongings online?" The woman blinked and then laughed. "Oh, that," she said, waving a hand. "Yes, I listed a few things. I thought it would be a shame to throw them away. And honestly, I needed a new hobby. Something to keep the mind sharp, you know." I felt my knees go weak. Sophie stepped forward. "They weren't yours to sell." "Well, nobody was using them," she replied, like it was the most logical thing in the world. "And you know how expensive vitamins are these days. It's not like I was making a fortune." I stared at her in disbelief. She wasn't just unashamed, she was proud. I wanted to scream, to tear every listing off the app with my bare hands. But instead I took a breath. "Cancel the listings. Now." Her face darkened. "Excuse me." "You heard me," I said, stepping closer. "Take them down. All of them. Or I'll file a police report for theft. And Greg," I turned to him, "if you knew about this, you're complicit." Greg looked like a balloon with the air rapidly escaping. I didn't think she'd actually save it," I said. I grabbed Sophie's hand. Let's go." "Wait, what do you mean, police?" Greg's mother called after me. "That's absurd. We're family." I turned on the porch. "No," I said. "You're not." We drove straight to the police station. Filing the report felt like cutting off a limb and cauterizing the wound in one motion. It hurt, but it was necessary. They took the claim seriously. The officer in charge said they'd begin by freezing the account. If items were already sold, there could be additional charges. When I got home that night, I collapsed into the couch at Sophie's apartment and wept, not just for the things, but for what they represented. My mother's last handwriting on recipe cards, the hand-woven shawl she wore on cold mornings, the china teacup with the chipped rim from my 7th birthday. You can't put a price tag on those things, but Greg's mother had tried. I called Greg the next morning. His tone was clipped. "You went too far." "No," I said. "You did. We're family. We were. Before you destroyed everything." "You're still my wife," he barked. "Not for long," I said. "And unless you want the theft charges to go to court, you'll return every unsold item immediately. And you'll pay for what you did to the house." Greg didn't respond right away. Then he muttered, "Fine. I'll talk to my lawyer." "You do that," I said and hung up. A few days later, I got a message from Greg's number, but it wasn't from him. It was his father. The text read, "You should be ashamed of yourself. We offered you a home, a future, and you repay us with threats and lawsuits?" I didn't answer, but the next call I did pick up. It was Greg, and he was panicked. "My dad's sick," he said. "He finally went to the hospital. It's cancer. Terminal. The doctor says it's bad." I sat in silence. "Finally," I said, "when my mother was sick, your father joked about her finally letting go. Your mother said it would be easier if she died quickly so we could move on." "That's not the point. I told your father to see a doctor. He laughed in my face, called me dramatic. And now you want sympathy." "You're cold," Greg hissed. "No," I said calmly. "I'm done." And I hung up. Greg's father passed away within the month. At the funeral, I didn't go. Neither did Sophie. But Logan did, for one reason only, to collect a copy of the will. When he called me afterward, his voice was flat, almost stunned. "He left the house to me," he said. "What?" "Grandpa's house. He left it in my name. And the rest of the assets are split between Dad and Grandma." I leaned back, closing my eyes. Even in death, Greg's father was trying to manipulate control. I could see the plan unfolding. Greg and his mother move into that house. Logan, maybe too soft to say no, lets it happen. The cycle continues. But my son had other ideas. "I'm selling the land," Logan said. And, "Mom, I've already made arrangements." "For what?" "You'll see." I wasn't sure what he meant, until 1 week later, Greg called me, voice shaking. "You have to come here. Now." When I arrived at his parents' house, I saw them both outside, mouths agape. Heavy machinery rumbled in the background. Demolition trucks, excavators, and standing there with arms folded, watching it all like a director overseeing a final scene in a tragedy, was Logan. The roar of demolition machinery cut through the still morning air like a war drum. Dust billowed upward as the excavators sank their claws into the old brick facade of Greg's childhood home. Pieces of roof caved in with a groan. Windows shattered like brittle bone. Greg's mother screamed, "Stop it! Stop this right now!" she shrieked, running toward the fence that separated them from the worksite. "This is our home. You can't do this. You can't." But Logan stood there unmoved. "This house was willed to me," he said calmly. "I can do whatever I want with it." Greg was red in the face, sputtering like an engine trying to start. "Are you insane?" "Logan, that was your grandfather's house." "I know," Logan said. "And you destroyed my grandmother's." That silenced them, just for a second. Then Greg exploded. "You spiteful little brat. You think this is justice? You think this is funny? That house was our future. No, Logan snapped. That house was Mom's past, and you took it from her. So now I'm taking this. Greg's mother collapsed to her knees, wailing. It sounded more like outrage than grief. You have no right, she cried. We're your family. What kind of son does this to his own father? You're right, Logan said, his voice quieter now. No son should ever have to. But you made me choose between blood and decency. I chose decency. I stood a few feet behind him, silent, a hand pressed over my mouth. I hadn't known. He hadn't told me the details. But I saw it in his face now. Logan had planned this carefully, deliberately. Not for revenge. For truth. For balance. The machinery clanged on, tearing down what remained of the back walls. Bricks crumbled. Pipes groaned. Years of carefully polished furniture and bitter Sunday dinners fell in on themselves like a dying star. By the end of the day, there was nothing left but rubble and silence. Greg didn't speak to me after that. He didn't look at me, didn't call. But a week later, I received a transfer confirmation. Damages, compensation, restitution for the destroyed house and for the stolen belongings. No note attached, just numbers, cold and clean. Logan had also recovered every item that hadn't already been sold. He boxed them carefully and brought them to me himself. When I opened the first box and saw my mother's apron, soft, wrinkled, still faintly carrying the scent of vanilla and cedar, I broke down. You always have me and Sophie, Logan whispered, arms around my shoulders. You're not alone. That night, for the first time in months, I slept through the night. Greg and his mother? They were back in the company housing now, the one Greg had once mocked for being too cramped and too beneath him. Only this time it was permanent. With his father gone and no house to live in, they'd become invisible. Just faces in a hallway. Sophie told me his reputation at work had taken a nosedive. Word spreads, especially when your colleagues' wives are part of the neighborhood book club. One of them, Susan, a sweet woman I used to bake muffins for, called me and said, You did the right thing, Monica. Everyone knows now. You're not the villain in this. It didn't make me smile. Not exactly. But it eased something. The wound was still there, but it had stopped bleeding. A few months passed. I continued living with Sophie, helping her with meal preps, planting flowers on her balcony, folding laundry while she graded papers. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stay forever. Then one afternoon, Logan showed up at the apartment with a strange look on his face. Can we talk? I nodded and sat across from him at the dining table. I proposed to Lily, he said. I smiled. That's wonderful. She said yes. Even better. He paused, then pulled out a folded brochure from his jacket pocket and slid it toward me. We're building a house on the land where Grandma and Grandpa's house used to be. We had it cleaned and appraised. It's perfect, and we want you to live with us. I stared at him. Logan, that's your future, not my burden. It's not a burden, he said. It's a foundation. We want to build something good where something ugly used to stand. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. Lily's okay with this. She's the one who insisted. I looked down at the brochure. It showed a modest 2-story home with white siding and wraparound porch, a garden in the back, a bench swing out front. It's beautiful, I whispered. So are you, he said. In the weeks that followed, I helped pick out paint colors and tile samples. We walked the land together, placing our feet where doorways would someday be. And slowly, a new kind of home began to rise from the ruins of the old. I wasn't sure what forgiveness looked like anymore, but I knew what healing felt like. It felt like my daughter humming in the kitchen while cooking dinner. It felt like my son texting me photos of bricks being laid. It felt like waking up without dread in my chest. One afternoon, as we stood on the porch of the half-built house, watching Lily inspect the light fixtures inside, Logan turned to me and said, You laughed when Dad said he demolished your house. I nodded. remembering that bitter, hollow sound in my chest. "But now?" he asked. I looked around, at the sunlight bouncing off the new windows, at the wind rustling through the tall Kentucky grass. "I'm still laughing," I said, "but now it's because I won." By the time the first coat of paint dried on the living room walls, I had memorized every creak of the new floorboards. I didn't move in right away. I told Logan and Lily I needed time to clear my things, to mentally leave behind a decade of compromises I had once called marriage. But the truth was I was afraid of being loved again, of being seen. Because for so long I had made myself small to fit inside someone else's expectations. I had tiptoed around rage, apologized for grieving, folded myself into silence, like some origami version of the woman I used to be. And yet every corner of that new home whispered, "You are allowed to be full-sized here." Lily hung sheer white curtains in my room, the kind that caught sunlight just right in the mornings. Logan installed a motion light along the path to the mailbox because I always forgot to bring it in until after sunset. They even set up a little herb garden behind the kitchen, just like the one my mother had tended with such pride. Every time I touched the rosemary, I swore I could hear her humming. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have granite countertops or fancy columns, but it was mine, not in title, in trust. That spring, I planted zinnias out front, bright oranges and reds, the kind of flowers that didn't care if the soil was rocky, the wind too harsh. They bloomed anyway, just like me. Sometimes Sophie would come by on weekends, kick off her shoes, and sit beside me on the porch swing. We'd drink iced tea and talk about everything and nothing. One Sunday she asked, "Do you think they regret it?" I didn't have to ask who she meant. Greg was still in company housing. His career never quite recovered, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was still blaming crazy women for all his problems. His mother had become a local pariah. No more potlucks, no more book club invites. Theft has a way of following you, especially when you never say sorry. Maybe, I said, but I stopped caring whether they do. Sophie tilted her head, even after everything. I smiled gently, especially after everything, because forgiveness isn't a gift for them. It's a decision I made for myself, not to erase the past, but to stop dragging it behind me like a coffin. One morning in early June, I stood at the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a cup of fresh coffee, watching Logan and Lily laughing over some misplaced tools in the backyard. And just like that, it hit me. I wasn't bitter anymore. I wasn't angry. I was simply free. I had thought the worst part of losing a home was the walls coming down, but it wasn't. It was believing for years that I had to live inside someone else's version of one. What Greg demolished wasn't just a house. It was the last thing tethering me to a life I had outgrown. And in its place, something else had risen. Not just beams and drywall. Something stronger. Something earned. Something I could finally call mine, not because of a deed or a bank transfer, but because it held my peace. When people hear my story, they always ask the same thing. Didn't it hurt to lose that house? Of course it did, but you know what hurt more? Living in it with someone who never saw its worth. So when Greg called me that day, announcing what he'd done like he was delivering a gift, I laughed, because that house wasn't what he thought it was. He thought it was money, leverage, a symbol of control, but it was never his to begin with. It was love and memory and sacrifice. It was everything he couldn't understand, and everything he couldn't destroy.